When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: The Cemetery Girl, Part 2. User: GlenEwan123. Posted October 29th, 1996.
I parked my truck a little ways down the dirt road she'd described. The woods out there were dense, a tangle of pine and oak that held the daylight like a secret. I walked in with my hands jammed in my coat pockets, kicking through the pine needles, listening for footsteps that weren't mine. I hadn't been to that old family cemetery since I was a kid, riding ponies at a church picnic. The place hadn't given me the creeps then. Tilted stones, mossy angel statues, the kind of silence that made you think twice about breathing too loud. I found her sitting on the low stone wall at the back of the cemetery, her legs crossed at the ankle, her dress catching the weak afternoon light. She looked almost surprised to see me, but then she smiled, and everything else in the world fell away. It was the kind of smile that felt like it was meant just for you. "You came," she said. "Of course I did." She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, but the breeze moved it right back. "I wasn't sure. Most people don't like it out here." "I don't mind it." She gave a small laugh. "No, I don't suppose you do." We walked between the old stones while she told me stories. Little things at first, the names on the markers, which branches of her family had settled in which corners of the cemetery, old tales her grandmother used to whisper about spirits that lingered near the woods. I listened closely, because her voice had a way of making even the strangest stories sound gentle. But as the sun dipped lower, her stories started to change. She'd say something that didn't match the dates on the stones. She'd refer to her parents in the present tense, but then mention something that happened when they were still living on the property, as if they'd long since moved on. She spoke about her childhood like it was something preserved in amber, never advancing, never aging. At one point, she stopped in front of a headstone half sunk into the ground. "I used to play here," she said. "My brother and I would hide behind this one. Mama hated it, said it was disrespectful." "How long ago was that?" I asked. She looked at the stone, her expression unreadable. "A while." "A couple of years?" "A while," she repeated. I should have felt alarm. I should have stopped and thought about how none of what she said fit together, but there was something about her presence, soft, magnetic, like a summer breeze passing through the ribs of an old house and carrying a memory with it. I didn't want to question her. I didn't want anything to break the spell of the two of us standing there among the pines. When the light began to fade, she walked me to the edge of the clearing. "You shouldn't stay after dark," she said quietly. "Why not?" "They don't like visitors." I tried to laugh it off. "Who's they?" She shook her head. "I can't tell you. Not yet." The shadows between the trees lengthened. The air grew colder in a way that didn't feel like temperature. It felt like something distant, pressing close. She kept glancing into the woods behind me as if expecting someone to step out at any moment. "Come tomorrow," she whispered. "Earlier. I'll tell you more." "About you?" "About everything." We stood there awkwardly, the way people do when they don't want to say goodbye. She reached up and touched my hand just for a second, but the cold of her fingers stayed with me all the way back to the truck. I didn't stop thinking about her the whole drive home, the stories she told, the way she kept scanning the trees, the way she seemed to fit perfectly in a place no living person should be comfortable. I didn't understand any of it, but I knew one thing. I wanted to see her again. I came back early the next day, breath fogging in the cool air. She was waiting for me by the gate this time, dress fluttering slightly like she'd been standing there a while. She didn't smile the way she had before. Her expression was tight, pained, like she was wrestling with something she couldn't say. "I'm sorry," she said. "I shouldn't have brought you here." "You didn't bring me. I chose to come." "It's not safe." "For me?" I asked. "For either of us." She stepped closer. "You shouldn't be able to see me, not like this." A cold shiver crawled up my spine. "What are you talking about?" She opened her mouth to answer, but something cracked in the woods, a sharp, deliberate snap of a branch. She flinched. "They're here," she whispered. "Who?" She grabbed my arm. Her fingers were ice cold. "We don't have time. You need to leave. Tell me what's going on." "I can't," she said. "You won't believe me, and if you do, then you'll never come back." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a second, the entire cemetery seemed to hold its breath. There was fear in her eyes, but something else too. Grief. Longing, the sadness of someone who had waited far too long for something they thought they'd never get again. "I didn't mean to drag you into this," she said. "I just wanted..." She stopped. Her voice broke. "Just go." Another branch snapped closer this time. She stepped backward toward the stones. The shadows around them seemed to deepen, stretching unnaturally. Her face paled as if the darkness itself was drawing something out of her. "I'll come back," I said. "Tell me when. Tell me how to help." "You can't help," she whispered. "Not yet. Not until you know what I am." The last rays of sunlight slipped behind the trees, and her outline flickered, only slightly, but enough to make my heart stutter. "Go," she whispered. "Please." I turned, forcing myself to walk, then to run. The woods behind me rustled with movement, too many footsteps, too soft to be human. I didn't look back until I reached the truck, and when I did, I saw her standing at the edge of the clearing, her dress unmoving in the windless air, and behind her, half hidden between the gravestones, were shapes, tall, watching, unblinking. As I slammed the truck door shut, the last thing I heard, carried on a voice that wasn't hers, was a low hiss that sounded like a warning meant for both of us. Maybe it was a promise.
Subject: Wild horses. User: Farmden2. Posted July 1st, 1998.
Some people have a hard time conceiving of a world where God and aliens exist. They think since aliens aren't in the Bible, the existence of one must mean the non-existence of the other. I'm lucky enough to be in a position where I know that's not true. I've seen an alien and I know God's out there working in mysterious ways. Beyond watching the moon landing on TV, I had never given much thought to what else might be out there in space. All my concerns are down here on Earth, where even a tiny bit of the money they put into blowing rockets up in the sky could have purchased all the feed I'd need for a year, or another tractor, or any damn thing. But I'm a farmer, not a scientist, and I suppose every man thinks his occupation is more important than everyone else's. However it was I felt about the stars, they came calling in December of 1971. At the time, I was tucked up in bed after watching Gunsmoke when the ground started to shake. That's not common around here, or at least it wasn't until those oil companies fired up their fracking operations some years back. They say that's not what's causing the quakes, of course, and they say a lot of things. The sky outside started to glow. I got up out of bed and walked over just in time to see a thing that looked like a missile, all fire and smoke, screaming its way down into one of my pastures a few miles away. It boomed like thunder as it passed, and when it hit the ground, by God, the house shook. I thought it was a meteor. That's what made the most sense. Something like that, I figured you could call the authorities. Maybe they bring the university types to look it over and haul it away. I was all but ready to call the sheriff when I had a thought. Why don't I go have a look-see first? Not the smartest decision a man could make in my position, but how often do you get to see a fresh space rock? First, I had to look in on the horses who were raising a commotion in the barn. They'd never been in such a lather, eyes wide. They'd heard thunder before, and the impact wasn't so close it should have put that kind of fear in them. I wondered what they knew that I didn't. I managed to settle them into something resembling calm before hopping on my snowmobile. The engine whined, followed a moment later by more panicked neighing from the barn. I could deal with them later, I thought, and gunned the engine out toward the far end of my property. I don't have neighbors, not in the traditional sense. My land backs up on a small mountain range, more a series of large hills, and the next private landowner is on the other side. The night sky was clear as a bell, stars glittering like diamonds. I didn't know at the time, but I'd never look at them the same way again. As I got closer to the general area where I thought the crash site might be, I started to see a wavy purple glow and aimed the snowmobile toward it. Whatever had come down, it must have been hot because the snow had melted away in a half-mile-long skid, the ground underneath it heavily burned. I followed the blackened trail, the purple glow getting stronger until I found what I thought was a meteor, except it didn't look like any old piece of space rock. It was an oddly shaped purple crystal, taller than me and maybe 3 times as wide, looking as if it was made out of triangles on triangles on triangles. I got closer, gingerly holding out a hand to see if I could feel any heat coming off it. There wasn't any, so I touched the cool surface, some of it crumbling away like wet rock candy. The feeling was weird, but also kind of appealing in that way of popping bubble wrap. I put both palms against the rock and gave it the gentlest push. A 2-foot-long section collapsed into purple dust, running away down to the ground. That's when I saw the spaceman. At first, I thought it was a Halloween mask, coarse, black, and leather scarred up by use over top of a square, Frankenstein-looking face with heavy ridges above and below the eyes. I hooked my fingers into the space between the mask and weird rock candy stuff surrounding it. My hands tingled as I pulled away first one rotting hunk of crystal, then another and another. When the whole of the face was finally visible, 2 sets of eyelids opened and I saw it wasn't a mask I was looking at. It was a face. I stepped back, my heart in my throat. As I watched, whatever it was started to get antsy, looking around itself, taking everything in. Then it opened what must have been its mouth, 3 neat red slashes, and let out a god-awful screeching sound as if someone had dragged rebar across violin strings. Blind fear gripped me, followed by a series of questions I couldn't stop from tumbling into my brain. Questions like, is that an alien in front of me? Because I don't know what else falls from the sky looking the way it does. It was followed by the much more practical, how friendly an alien is this? The spaceman answered that last one by jerking its crystal ship and making that terrible noise again. It looked at me with something I can only describe as pure hatred. And if you need any further proof of God's hand across the wider universe, there you have it. Hate looks the same, no matter which planet it comes from. Cracking sounds like small caliber pistol fire started coming from the gemstone ship. The alien's thrashing was allowing it to slowly break free. I held up both of my hands as if to show the spaceman I meant it no harm. My thought was that if hate was a universal emotion, maybe this would translate as well. Whether or not it did, I can't say. What I can say is the alien didn't give 2 splits what I did or didn't intend, breaking a door-sized chunk of crystal away from the rest, dropping it on the ground where it shattered. It wasn't going to be long before he was free, and from the look of it, that wouldn't go well for me. If I could get to the house, I could call someone. If I could get to the house, my gun was inside. I started to retreat to the snowmobile, carefully walking backward while keeping the spaceman in view. Distantly, I heard something that sounded like thunder. Was another one of these things coming? There was no more time for questions because in just a few seconds it was loose, smashing aside the rest of its ship and rising to full height on thick tree trunk legs. It was about 7 feet tall, its whole body covered with that coarse hide, all lumpy and knotted. From behind its back, 4 long arms stretched out. It took one giant step toward me and hit the ground with a thud. Being cooped up in the ship must have had an effect on its legs. Again, the spaceman roared and stretched out its arms to push itself back upright. Somehow it looked even angrier than it had before. The thunder was closer now, powerful enough to shake the ground. The thing in front of me looked away suddenly as if something else had taken its attention. Turning, I saw where the thunder was coming from. My horses had broken free from the barn, and were heading this way, completely out of control. I looked back toward the alien, and the hate in its eyes had been replaced with a kind of bafflement. It had no idea what it was looking at, and I took that break in its attention to run like hell. Seconds later, there was one last metallic screech before the horses made it to the ship, trampling both it and its pilot. This, possibly first ever interaction between extraterrestrial and horse, didn't seem to bother the horses all that much. In fact, afterward, they calmed right back down, milling around the pulverized remains of the spacecraft until the cold sent them trotting back to the barn. The spaceman, however, didn't handle the interaction nearly so well. I gingerly approached its prone, still form, waiting for any sign of movement. Its skin was torn in places, green ooze bubbling out of the holes. After 10 minutes, I decided it wasn't getting back up. Not being sure what the authorities would think of my animals having murdered an alien, I decided to handle it country style, wrapping the body in a tarp and hiding it until the ground thawed enough for a burial. It might sound like an undignified end for someone who came all the way across the stars, but this is good country, and before covering him up, I made sure to say a prayer. I asked God to bless this land, the soul of this poor spacefaring wretch, and, of course, wild horses.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.